Everyone, and welcome. So, what if I told you there might be a type of intelligence that has nothing to do with logic or emotions, but everything to do with, well, with meaning itself? That's the super provocative idea behind something called spiritual intelligence, or SQ. It's this concept that tries to measure our connection to life's deepest purpose. And, as you can probably guess, it's a deeply controversial one.
I mean, think about it. We're all familiar with IQ for logic and EQ for our emotions, right? We've kind of got those bases covered. But what about the really, really big questions? You know, the ones that keep us up at night. Is there some kind of intelligence that helps us navigate purpose, existence, and our place in the entire universe? That's the exact question we're diving into today.
So, first things first, what in the world is spiritual intelligence? To really get a grip on the whole debate, we first need to understand what its supporters are even talking about.
Okay, so here's the core definition. SQ is supposed to be this unique capacity. See, unlike IQ, which helps you, solve a tricky math problem, or EQ, which helps you read the room in a social situation, the idea behind SQ is that it's all about finding a deeper sense of meaning and purpose, and connecting your own personal experience to a much bigger picture. And right here is where the idea of SQ takes a pretty giant leap. Proponents argue that it's basically our tool for interacting with what they call a transcendent realm. Now for them, this isn't just some vague, fluffy idea. They see it as a very real dimension beyond our physical senses that's the source of ultimate truth and meaning.
So you might be wondering, how is this all supposed to work in the real world? Well, according to the theory, it's a four-step process. First, you have to move past your ego. Then you develop actual skills, like finding sacred meaning in everyday, mundane activities. After that, you're supposed to transfer qualities like wisdom and compassion from this higher consciousness into your actual life. And finally, you connect your inner spiritual world with your external, day-to-day reality.
But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? There's a problem, a really big one. This whole idea of SQ has faced some serious, and I mean serious, pushback from the scientific community. So now we're going to pivot and take a hard look at why so many scientists are just not buying it.
The scientific case against SQ pretty much rests on three main pillars. First, its definition is just way too vague. Second, you can't really measure it reliably. And third, it doesn't seem to work like a real intelligence. Let's break each of those down.
Okay, the first major hurdle is just defining the thing. Think of it this way. Love is a broad personal feeling, right? But if someone came along and said they invented love intelligence and a test to measure it, you'd want a very clear definition of what that is. Well, critics of SQ say it's basically just the concept of spirituality dressed up in a new, scientific-sounding outfit, but without a clear definition that separates the two.
And listen, this isn't just some minor academic squabble. This is a heavyweight punch. Howard Gardner, the guy who literally revolutionized how we think about intelligence with his theory of multiple intelligences, he actually considered SQ, and he rejected it. Why? Because it just lacked the hard scientific evidence required.
This leads us to a huge, huge problem. How on earth do you measure it? I mean, in science, if you can't measure something, you can't test it, and if you can't test it, it's just a hypothesis, not a proven theory. With an IQ test, you solve a puzzle. There's a right answer and a wrong one. But with SQ, most tests are just surveys where you say how spiritual you think you are. That's not a test of ability, it's just a test of self-perception, and for scientists, that's just not going to cut it.
And this brings us to maybe the most fundamental critique of all. Does SQ actually function as an intelligence? Because, at its core, an intelligence is supposed to be a tool for solving problems.
Right. Here's the key distinction. A high IQ can help you build a hospital, or it can help you build a bomb. It's morally neutral. But a lot of the definitions of SQ include virtues like compassion and wisdom, so critics argue that this confuses being smart with being good. And in the world of psychology, those are two very, very different things.
And there it is, boiled down to one simple, powerful number. Gardner had this checklist of 8 specific scientific criteria that any new intelligence had to meet to be considered official. Spiritual intelligence, it just didn't make the cut.
But you know what? The story doesn't just end there. The scientific critique of SQ didn't just slam the door on the idea of a meaning intelligence. It actually led to a new, more refined proposal.
So instead of SQ, Howard Gardner put forward this idea of existential intelligence. Now, this isn't about connecting to some transcendent realm. It's about our capacity to just grapple with the big questions. Why are we here? What happens when we die? What is the meaning of it all?
And here is the absolutely crucial difference.
SQ is tied to a specific belief in a transcendent realm, but existential intelligence is about the capacity to think about these big questions, whether you're a devout believer or a staunch atheist. It's a neutral, academic concept focused on the cognitive act of pondering, not on a specific spiritual belief.
But, and here's the final twist, while existential intelligence is a much more scientifically sound concept, Gardner himself admits that it still doesn't have enough hard evidence, especially from neuroscience, to be officially crowned as its own, distinct, standalone intelligence. The search, it seems, continues.
Which, of course, brings us to this final, really profound question. This whole debate over spiritual and existential intelligence forces us to ask, is our deep, human quest for meaning something that can, or even should, be quantified and measured like we measure logic or emotion? It's a question that sits right at that fascinating intersection of science and the human spirit. And yeah, it's definitely a question worth thinking about.